welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Today we'll be revisiting the Caribbean Single ICT Space with Jennifer Britton, Deputy Program Manager, ICT for Development at the CARICOM Secretariat in Ghana. Jennifer was last on the podcast in 2019 and gave us an update on the Single ICT Space. It has been over a year since we last spoke, and a lot has happened in our world, which has emphasized the importance of telecommunications and ICT in the region, along with the importance of the Single ICT Space. So in addition to getting an update on milestones that have been achieved to date, we are hoping that Jennifer will give us the scoop on the latest plans and developments, as well as providing some indication of how close we might be to realizing the Single ICT Space. Jennifer, welcome back.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning. Lovely to be here, and thank you for having me again on your fabulous podcast.
Thank you so much for joining us again. But Jennifer, since you were last on the show, it was September 2019. And, it would be just great to just get a brief update as to what has happened with respect to the Single ICT Space initiative since then.
Good. Thank you, Michelle. And again, I really welcome and thank you for the opportunity to share some information and views and updates with your audience. When we met in September 2019, I think we were preparing avidly for an ICT ministers meeting, which was going to really hopefully shed some light on where countries wanted to go and how we could recoalesce around those things as a region in moving the Single ICT Space forward. So we had, I think, what was a fully resourced meeting, and it was chaired by Prime Minister Mitchell of Grenada, who has the lead responsibility for ICT, science and technology, including ICT in the region. A number of issues were discussed at the meeting, and it was very heartening in the sense that ministers were reflecting that they too were I would say, engaged around the Single ICT Space, which has not happened prior to it as much force as we had at the November meeting. And it was very clear that ministers and member states were obviously seeing the validity and the opportunities in joining together to make the Single ICT Space work. So we did a number of things at that meeting, but I think it really started to craft a way for moving forward into 2020, and I'm sure we'll come to 2020 in the discussion. But we looked at things like the Single ICT Space Partnership and decided that that may be too cumbersome for the region to deal with at that time, and worked on deciding instead on doing Single ICT Space working groups, which would provide the same energy we needed for a partnership, but would look at discrete items, which I thought was forward thinking from getting that from the ministers and being able to move it forward so that they knew that their officials were working in this mode. We also looked at several things, cybersecurity, etc. But the bigger one for me, which I think was a win for the region once we start working on it assiduously, is the fact that ministers agreed that we should start working on the whole of government approach, which, as you know, is not a new approach, but it has never been, I think, voiced in our construct over the many years. So it's the same thing as joined up government, and ministers were really seeing themselves and placing themselves at the core almost of helping governments to work as whole of government or joined up government. So there were a number of other things which we discussed. Again, as you were asking me, they discussed the seeming slow pace of implementing the Single ICT Space, and we all, I think, had to recognize that and take the full responsibility. What is happening is that I must confess that I don't have a handle to say to you 10% or 25% or 50%, but many things are happening in member states, and obviously you understand that that collective will give us the information we need to figure out how we're moving forward on the Single ICT Space work. But having seen that, heard the what I call the lamentations of the ministers and the member states at that meeting, we've determined that we're going to work on, well, we should have started started work in 2020, but other things overtook us, mainly the COVID-19 pandemic. We've decided that we're going to work on a living dashboard for the single ICT space, where we'll start to develop that dashboard hopefully in a couple of months this year, so that persons could have a real-time view of what is happening in member states and how it affects the regional outlook for the single ICT space. I'm going to pause there for a little while, and we can continue on this question if you like.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, because I'm writing furiously as you're talking because there are so many questions now that I want to touch on.
Sure.
Okay, you mentioned about the working groups. Have any of those been established as yet?
Yes, there are about 6 working groups, and all of them have been established and worked except cybersecurity. Cybersecurity just hasn't worked because there was already some activity going on at the impacts level, where we have a regional cybersecurity committee, and we wanted to see how that working group could help to resource that committee. But again, because of the COVID-19 issues and impacts work for the region, we didn't bring that working group to the fore. But there's a working group on innovation and future technologies. There's one which is looking at regional connectivity and related issues. And in that group is where we're looking at the mandate that heads asked us to look at, with removal of roaming, zero rating websites and that type of thing. There's one on digital skills. There's one which will look at how we engage ourselves regionally and international engagement and communication. And there's another one which is besetting me. Oh, youth in the single ICT space.
Okay.
So they have started work. And the COVID pandemic, although frightening and debilitating for many of us, I'm sure, as you recognize in the industry, was a big fillip for ICT things and digital transformation. So in the middle of 2020, we did have an emergency meeting with ministers, because obviously the grand plans we had in November 2019 were not going to take the same shape in 2020. And in that meeting, ministers agreed to about 22 or thereabout recommendations for fast tracking digital transformation. And all of these obviously respond to issues which were previously articulated in the single ICT space. So it's not 2 bodies of work. What the working groups managed to do for the rest of 2020 was to come up with 3 to 5 discrete activities against those recommendations, so that we now have something which is almost a full action plan for moving forward with digital transformation to present to ministers early in this year and to move forward on those activities. So I'm excited about that. I am happy that the working groups also were able to work and to provide, again, a living example of using the technologies to still get work done.
Indeed. And that's wonderful. One of the things, at least when you were talking initially, and even everybody lamenting the seemingly slow pace of implementation, and I was thinking, it is true, and it's an awesome undertaking. It's multi-layered. It comprises 20 plus countries, all of the member states, hopefully, and it's almost as if you're trying to to eat an elephant. And yes, you kind of have to do it one bite at a time. But I think one of the things that I am grappling with is the fact that because it is so big and so multifaceted, that it is difficult to gauge your progress along the path, but also the environment is changing as well. So what you might be focused on may not be relevant, or it may no longer be as relevant. Let me say it like that. And I'm just trying to grapple with and wrap my head around how one can be efficient and effective in trying to move along this path that we're on, because it's been, I mean, we have been talking about it for almost 3 years now, at least you and I, in terms of on the podcast, and it was conceptualized several years before that. So you wonder now, how do we actually get our arms around this properly?
Indeed, Michelle, and I think it's every time we speak, you open new fissures in my mind, and I thank you for that. But one of the things I think that we're grappling with, and I'm not moving the bulk of the responsibility away from me and the Secretariat and the ICT cluster of organizations. But I think one of the things that we're grappling with, which we have not yet put on the table, and I hope that in this conversation I can now put it on the table, is our governance structure in the region and the willingness, I would say, of persons to stay in their own lane, but still be willing to collaborate outside of that lane to make sure that something for the greater good happens. I think we have done, I think I mentioned it on the last podcast. And again, I'm saying all of these things respectfully because it's not part of my day-to-day responsibility. Mm-hmm. But I think the region has done a fabulous job in bringing to life the organizations that we need. One of the things that I think is missing is that those organizations have not been continuously resourced with information as to what is important to the region and how they fit in. So my day-to-day struggle is actually almost having the same conversations with my colleagues in regional organizations about their role in the single space or their role in digital economy or their role in digital transformation. So one of the things which I'm going to embark on very gingerly this year, because again, as I said, it's not in my remit of responsibility, but it needs to be done, is really having some for want of a better word, I want to call them conversations, but collaborative conversations where we really speak to each other as institutions and take hold of the things that we are responsible for. I think you can sit and you understand the industry well enough to know that they're not even blurred lines anymore. It's probably almost becoming one big ocean when we start to look at things like digital transformation and digital economy. So persons can't stay on their lane and say, I'm only doing X because X also has add-ons, adhesions, which link to other entities. And I think about the issue which we probably take for granted about consumer protection. Consumer protection is no longer in its own lane. You now have to look at consumer protection in a digital environment. What are the legal issues and how do we bring those things to bear in a day-to-day perspective for people, our small businesses, our larger businesses. So it's a whole set of actors who would have to be at the table, and how do we bring them together constantly and cohesively and intelligently to make sure that the digital transformation issues which are going to bring life and tangibility, for want of a better word, to the single ICT space are all happening at the same time. So I think one of the bigger things that is besetting us is information, and I say that respectfully, and there's an information gap, and also our governance arrangements. We need to be a little more flexible in thinking as we go forward on our governance arrangements.
Indeed. And one of the things that came to mind in terms of the conversations and the collaborative conversations that you might wish to have is the whole issue for me of, I guess certainly as a lay person, and I guess somebody outside of all of these organizations and institutions, is a sense of transparency. I love the idea of the living dashboard because I think clearly we can hopefully be able to get a more real-time sense of what might
Precisely.
be happening. But I also wondered about it in terms of the extent to which one might be able to support a more transparent posture as it relates to the single ICT space, because I think there can be a sense that, as I think I said before, the CARICOM and all of the institutions are removed from everybody, but they're serving the people. And to the extent that maybe we need to have the people to help our political directorates to understand what is priority for us, because if for us to do business in the region, for example, all of the hoops that we have to jump through at this point in time, and something like, a regional digital economy, a regional ICT space can support and facilitate that in very meaningful ways for the man on the street, for the average business person, etc. It may go a long way to really giving the whole initiative, the support and backing of not necessarily just, the ministers of government who are sitting at the table with multiple issues that they have to address, and really help to probably give the whole initiative a boost and the attention that it probably deserves.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that over the past 3 to 5 years, I would think that the Secretariat itself has been trying to step out of its mold, and through the use of things like working groups and task forces and that type of thing, we have been trying to pull in experts and other persons in let's call it civil society, who can add to the conversation and bring a non-government perspective, because sometimes I'm sure you'll agree, when you are looking at something for a long time, you tend to get very insular. You tend to be sometimes emotionally attached to it. So I think we've been working very hard to try to ensure that we bring in other experts from the other side of the table to support us in this work. We have not obviously done it at a broad base yet, but I think the issues which came to the head last year because of the COVID-19 pandemic are forcing us in that direction. And one such that we had raised with the ICT ministers in 2019, and which came to the Human and Social Development ministers last year, namely education, was a digital skills task force. And we have agreed that we will establish one in this year, and we will be looking at people from both private sector and government to co-chair that task force and that type of thing. And the experts will be drawn from every facet of society and that type of thing. So I hope that that starts to give some really high level example that we can reach out, and we should reach out to use all the intellectual capital that's available to us, and to make sure that persons know that it's being done in the highest level of respect and attention for their time, because in most cases we can't pay for this time because we have no funding line which says hiring of experts and that type of thing. So it is really something that, again, which I hope will respond to the Caribbean-ness that we always speak about and are proud about, and reinforce our Caribbean identity when we use our own experts in the first instance to bring something to fruition. So that's one of the ways. It's not a foolproof way. It's not the only way, but I think that we have to start reaching out in a big way to have other publics involved. One of the clear things that is in front of us is that digital transformation is not only about ICT, and it gets a lot of its magic and life from interface with other sectors. So it is a whole new body of work for the ICT for D team, the ICT officials in the quoted working groups, to be able to now figure out what will we and who will we interface with in 2021 to ensure that the things we're talking about digital transformation, get done. And the region has flagged for many years several priority sectors, agriculture being one, youth being one, education being one, now again, all over again since COVID-19, health. So one of the big ticket items on the agenda as well is to find working collaborative ways to reach out to practitioners in these sectors to talk about digital transformation and to share information in an iterative fashion so that we can move the needle forward for the digital transformation expectations of the region.
Right. And over the last year, so especially with COVID-19 and I guess the whole focused on ICT digital transformation, from your vantage point, what were you seeing as it relates to digital transformation that you probably were pleased about, surprised about, hoped it would have advanced further? I just want to get a sense of just your own observations as to how the region fared and what you saw and experienced.
Right. Thanks, Michelle. That's a great question. I saw many things, and I think you saw them too. But one of the things which always delights me is that our people are filled with so much innovative energy that it is sometimes staggering. And I was immensely pleased to see youth responding in the usual way that they have been responding in the last 3 to 5 weeks in thinking through problems related to COVID-19 and developing apps very quickly. We may not have been able to use all the apps or even assimilate the number of apps which may have been built or be in ideas of the youth at this moment to deal with COVID-19. But I thought it was a very refreshing response in many cases where you didn't have government or private sector guidance. It was just civil society youth getting together to share ideas and to work on some of those ideas to alleviate some of the problems. I think we've seen some of the ones which respond to us as human beings, the ability to get our food and grocery, where a number of young people, I don't know, in several of the countries of the region came up with businesses where they would use the technologies to hire and keep their staff together and also use that staff, deploy that staff to pick up your groceries, pay for them, pick up your food deliveries, that type of thing. So that is in the space now, and I think it will continue, I hope, forever. But there are other ones who are looking at who understand the landscape without even being in government or private sector, and that's very rewarding, and realize that they need things like geographic information to link to citizen information, to link to healthcare institutions, to do a lot of the contact tracing that we talk about so flippantly and that type of thing. So a number of applications and the thoughts that are going forward were very rewarding to me. The issues which it highlighted about the education sector, again, were bittersweet. I think we knew some of them, but some of them have really come very frontally, very frontally on our minds and in our workspaces. And I think it gives the opportunity for the region, which has been working very, very hard on education issues for the last, well, all the last 5 decades that I've been alive, at least, and even before that, to really relook at our education now and look at the opportunity areas and start to work on them rather than coming back with the whole value chain and trying to work along that whole value chain. Digital skills is one that I am intrigued and excited about because, one, we have to COVID-19 has put us in a place where we recognize, at least I hope so, that digital skills now needs to transcend the whole spectrum. It is not only for our teachers, our learners need them as well, but more importantly, even as we think about digitally transforming governments to be able to respond and continue to respond to where the pandemic has put us, we need to be able to use digital skills to reskill and upskill those workers who will now be hopefully working in a new dimension as we continue to digitally transform government. So digital skills is really one of the exciting offshoots of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I'm excited about. I also, while I was talking about the youth app development work, also was thrilled and intrigued by the number of entrepreneurship avenues which were opened up by youth and other people in dealing with in trying to mitigate the COVID pandemic measures and the lockdowns and that type of thing. So the entrepreneurship spirit is still alive and still has many pioneers, I think, in the region. And I hope that we can tap into them as well as part of this vast renewing ecosystem which we need to foster for digital transformation in, I think, the next 12 to 18 months to keep the momentum going.
Yes. Wonderful. Yes, this whole issue of digital skills, I think, really came to the fore last year. And it's really not just about coding and so on.
Precisely.
It's really about digital literacy to a considerable degree, because we all need to become more comfortable with the technology. We all need to find ways and means of leveraging the technology as we move forward.
Agreed. Totally agree.
So just going back to the point you're making, I guess one of the focal areas at the November 2019 meeting was the whole of government approach. And I think, looking at, hopefully, and I mean, as I'm saying it to you, I'm almost beginning to roll my eyes because, e-government and all of these things.
I know.
We have been on this train for probably 10, 15 years now. What is going to be different this time around in terms of, trying to move to a whole of government approach? Because we've been talking about e-government and seamless government and so on for at least a decade.
Yeah, and I think again, I bear a lot of the responsibility, and maybe I take more responsibility than I need to sometimes. But my view of it is that as practitioners, we have not, and we probably had this conversation in the last time we chatted on the podcast, we have not done our work in demystifying the industry. I think we've had lovely conversations amongst ourselves. We understand it. We pat ourselves on the back, but we have not spent enough time talking to the other side of that equation, which is everybody else. If, as I gave the example about digital transformation, etc., we need everybody else on board. So I think it may seem like a softer issue, but it is actually the hard part of our work. How do we make the other persons who are necessary for the digital transformation efforts and the whole of government efforts, how do we engender that buy-in? And in terms of e-government and seamless government, etc., I think the bigger point about the whole of government and joined up government issue is that now, when we were talking about it probably a decade ago, it was probably a theoretical concept almost. Now we have digital technologies which can provide the glue to make the government seamless and to make that government operate as one unit. So again, the onus is on us as technology practitioners, I think, to stop talking about the things that need to be done from the technology standpoint and have the conversation about the people and processes part of it to make sure that we are engendering buy-in, we're sharing information, and that persons really understand what we need. I'm terribly I make every effort not to use these catchphrases which come around in our world and in the readings, because I think we then get caught up in the mystery of the message, and we don't spend the time to demystify that message and ensure that any person in the street could understand what we mean by whole of government. The other part of the issue as well, again, it relates, I think, to us as ICT practitioners not doing our work as hard as we could, because the frightening thing for me in reading a lot of the things that are going on in the region is that digital transformation and ICT and connectivity, etc., always appears to be on a separate road from the things that we want to do and we have to do. So again, it is getting into the heads of the political process that persons that make the key decisions in the region, as well as getting into the day-to-day, everyday worker and person in the street as to what these things mean and how the digital technologies could really help us to fast track or even alleviate some of the issues that we wanted to achieve, for example, in the CARICOM single market and economy. So I think the onus is really on us as ICT practitioners to change our way of work, change our style of talking, change the types of encounters we have, and to really increase the what I started to talk about, the collaborative conversations with other sectors and other practitioners so that the message can be filtered down and across and through governments.
Understood. But one of the things that I think is happening is that we are probably at a point where we have done a lot of the digitalizing.
Yeah.
We have computers, in government offices. They have probably their networks within departments, units, across ministries, and so on. But I think there are a couple of challenges that we have. And one of them that, again, causes me to roll my eyes is the whole issue of the quick wins. Everybody wants the
Yes.
low hanging fruit, and that's all that
Yeah.
they tend to focus on for the most part. And the longer term activities that are going to really shift the needle forward probably get pushed back and not given the attention. And some of that, of course, has to do with costs, where, they require, probably considerable funds, but funds to be available over an extended period of time. And I think we're getting to the point where we have done all of the sort of low hanging fruit and quick win activities, and really now have to focus in on the deeper work that needs to actually happen. And I'm not sure if we're there yet, and whether or not we have the stamina from, probably from a political perspective, and how, our election cycles and all of these things work to really ensure that we are successful in a somewhat timely fashion as it relates to many initiatives, including, whole of government and e-government.
Right. And your rolling of your eyes is frightening to me, but I hear what I understand what you mean. And I mean, even as you were asking the question, it is very multi-layered and multifaceted itself. Part of I think one of the sad things that emerged from the COVID-19 pandemic is that we are no longer going to be on the preferred list of many of our development partners because everybody in the world is dealing with the pandemic issues. And just by the fact that they have 10 and 20 times the population that we have as a whole region, amplifies the problem for them even more. And so that a lot of the resources that they would have wanted to give us are not going to be there. It provides what I would call a delicious challenge for the region in the sense that we need to now start looking along our value chains and our processes. And I think the point you're making is very well taken, that it is a new type of work and we may not want to acknowledge that we have to find the stamina to do it. But you're right again, we are at, I think we're at first level digitization. Everybody is fairly computerized and persons are aware of it. What needs to happen now is I think agencies and units and governments and in regional organizations need to start asking, how does what I do using digital technologies impact or can influence or can change what needs to happen in the unit next to me or the unit above me or whatever the case might be? Because I think that if we are serious about process development and looking within our processes and across the value chains, we will see that there actually there may not be dollars in the bank cost savings, but it definitely cost savings in terms of time, the resources you may need to use, and all of those things, which I think presents another good basis for the conversation on whole of government and joint of government. Things come to mind for me, such as something just came to mind. It went out of my mind, but let's say based on what we learned in the COVID-19 pandemic, people can't move, etc., and we decided we wanted to bring drone activity into really a fulsome part of our regional activity. Drones are now being looked at the Ministry of Transport and Civil Aviation, and they're policying according to them being a flying object. But then now they can become a health resource. They could be a people resource. They could be a social services resource because those drones could drop in anything from money to equipment. So how do we, the conversation needs to be had with civil aviation, health, police and whatever else to say this drone could now be an asset, not just seeing it and policying in a very narrow way. So it's things like that which I think are positive outshoots from what happened in 2020 with COVID-19, but the conversations need to be had. And I think interestingly enough, we are labeled as people who like to talk a lot, but a lot of the deep conversations which may cause us some pain, and I mean it doesn't have to be personal pain, but is national or regional pain, we don't tend to have. And I'm still fascinated, and I may have raised it with you, but I'm thinking about it all the time when I look in social media sites and that type of thing. Once we're talking about things which are run-of-the-mill, probably day-to-day issues, a number of our Caribbean brothers and sisters are in there. But once you start to dig deep and talk about policy issues and process issues, a number of people fall away from the conversation. So I think it's just another set of, another level of competencies which we need to bring to bear, and to really take the seriousness of the fact that while we may not be left without the protection of the development partners, the international development partners, they too are focused on helping their citizens stay safe and get well and that type of thing. So we are, in a sense, paddling our own canoe and need to take hold of that with the maturity that it needs and really start to interrogate each other and interrogate what we're doing to see if it still has utility for the next month or the next year.
Indeed, indeed. And you raise a really valid point because I realize though that when perhaps we're talking from a policy making perspective, we all recognize the cross cutting nature of ICT. So, it works right across all sectors and so on. But when you now may look at the sort of practical sense, and you spoke about drones and how it's probably looked at and focused on from a civil aviation and the fact that it is an aerial device.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that it has utility, or it could potentially have utility in other sectors or
Correct.
for other sectors, but we see it as just some, this ICT or aerial device, and therefore the conversation that we probably could be having about how best to leverage a drone
Yes.
technology in general, or even for very specific things, does not necessarily occur, and we lose out. And I think that is such a valid point.
Yeah. But we also need, Michelle, we need some champions in government, because this whole of government and the joint of government and the conversations are not going to happen by themselves. And I'm not sure if our governments are even taking the space and time to do that. I know that they have several bodies, the intergovernmental, interministerial committees that meet, the permanent secretaries meet, etc. But if there is no mechanism, and that's one of the things on my mind this year about in this first quarter, how do we get the burning issues to those committees so that they can start to look at them? I don't think that they want to be hands off of the major issues, but they have not been brought to their attention in any holistic manner. So it's one of the things that I hope that you and other experts in the region will join me in trying to come up with some easy way. I hate to say one pagers, but some easy briefing document which says these are the topical issues and these are the ministries and bodies that you need to link with to make this whole of government thing happen, and to start to develop new processes and new opportunities in government. You mentioned something else which popped something into my mind, and I know it's gone. But I think that we really need to start to look at champions. Oh, you mentioned cross cutting, and cross cutting is one of the, as I said earlier, I don't like to have these catchphrases in
Yes.
my own vocabulary, because I don't know that the region has taken the time to even disseminate what a cross cutting entity, cross-cutting sector really is or does. And the more we look at it now, that pyramid is being shifted, because almost everything, particularly since COVID-19, is becoming cross-cutting.
Yes.
Education is cross-cutting, health is now cross-cutting. So how do we really, as you started the conversation, eat that elephant in bite-sized chunks? Because now we are beset with a new dynamic, I think, where a number of sectors, if we're going to live and be able to be healthy and breathe properly and all of that, a number of those sectors are now profiling as, for want of a better word, cross-cutting. I try to force my colleagues to call it pervasive,
Mm-hmm,
and hope
mm-hmm.
that that gives them a different way of dealing with the sector. But we now have another exciting challenge where many of our sectors are now profiling in this way. And how do we treat with them? And how do we want to treat with them? Again, from the theoretical standpoint, I see it as a great opportunity for the whole of government issue, but again, articulating it across the down the chain is what is the heavy lifting work to be done.
Absolutely. And as we begin to wind down, I think one of the priority initiatives you had indicated, for quite some time was the whole focus on removal of roaming rates. And I think you did mention that there was some work, a working group had been set up to address that issue. But has there been any progress on that front?
Um, the working group is about to conclude its work, and I think one of the big things that the heads of government would like is for us to declare a deadline which they could share with the operators, etc. I think COVID-19, the pandemic, and the measures that we had to put in place put a number of other issues on the table, which obviously became more important.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the silent issue is that we have watch our telecoms operators operate without those roaming rates for a year, and they have not gone under. So I
Yes.
mean, yeah, I don't want to put them on the spot, but it's something that obviously it could not have been that major a deal in their own finances and that type of thing if they could manage a year and almost a month without any of that rate return. I don't want to be flippant again about their rate of return, and I really want to thank the operators, I think, for the mammoth job they did in keeping us connected and all of that in 2020, and continue to support and recognize their work. At the June 2020 meeting, though, as a result of COVID-19, and that was just in the first 6 months, the Association of National Operators, CANTO, brought very formally to the ministers the fact that they'd like to have some, I think, open, candid conversations, but also highlighted a number of the things which were besetting them as operators and which came to the fore as COVID-19 measures were being put into place. So there is I would call it a new opportunity to have a different type of debate with our operators. Again, for me, timing is important. And if we let this period where everybody is attuned to the opportunities of connectivity, if we let this period lag, we will lose that opportunity. But yes, the committee has done work. Yes, there are some briefs. Some of the things are no longer even valid because of what we experienced in COVID-19. And so we're hoping to be able to present that report to Prime Minister Mitchell before the end of this quarter so that he can take it forward to heads of government, and then we start having the necessary conversations with CANTO and its members on the roaming rate issue.
Okay. And I'm winding down. So just, I think, my penultimate question: what keeps you up at night these days?
What keeps me up at night is I feel like my heart wants to spend 24 hours engaging youth, but I don't know that even those of us who've traversed this way for the last 20 years, I don't even know that we speak the language that youth speak anymore in terms of what they want to do with the technologies. But I still do see that there is space for us to engage youth, because there are a number of things that are still profiling in the region which are troublesome and which need some work, in the sense that your young person in your house may know every single social media site in the world, but I have had instances, I have a teenage son where he will come up to me and say, who's the Prime Minister of India now? And he's holding his phone. So, I mean, how are we not translating to the youth that what they're holding in their hand is the power of all the collective minds in the world? So how do we translate that? How do we make them that tool, and whatever tool they have in their hand, living, and help them to shape the future that they want to shape for the next decade or next 2 decades? So that's one of the things that keeps me up at night. Drilling down a little more is the fact that I think many of us, and no offense to you or anybody else, many of us are aging out of the sector.
Yes.
And there is not a good succession plan. So my heart is worried because we have not made government jobs attractive to the youth. So the same youth that I talked about a minute ago frown when you say, oh, would you consider a position at the Secretariat or whatever, because we've not made government work attractive. So making government work attractive and looking at providing successors for many of us in the sector is one of the other things that keeps me up. A third thing that keeps me up is that there is still a huge body of work to be done in terms of letting people, everybody now, and entrepreneurs in particular, and potential entrepreneurs, particularly women, see the power of whatever tool they have in their hand to be able to advance whatever idea they may have, whatever product they may wish to bring to market, etc. I think, again, our women have been sort of marginalized, and I take that fully on my shoulders, because as a woman, have I done enough to share the magic of the technologies? And so entrepreneurship and linking it to how you can use ICT to punch above your weight is one of the things that I think we need to break free in the region. And then lastly, because I find that I think a number of our things get bottleneck to this area, is that we too have not taken time to engage our parliamentarians and our legal brothers and sisters across the region, and really also seeing that the digital technology sector is alive, kicking, and well, and how to have them marry their fabulous and vast legal expertise with the sector to help us get things, bills and acts and things that governments need to empower themselves, pass through and have the necessary discussion happen in parliamentary committees and even at parliament sittings, etc. So that keeps me up, as well as to how to break in. There's a lot of work being done in the world about e-parliaments, etc. But again, I think we're keeping it at the fledgling level, where we're thinking that it just means computerizing parliament, but it also means that parliament must have in its bosom the knowledge of the opportunities and the ills of digital technologies to be able to resource their government and the populace in an intelligent manner. So I think those are the four things. There must be a fifth, but I can't think of one now. There are several things that keep me up at night.
Wow.
But those are
Well,
the five, yes. Yeah, those are the four.
wonderful. Or not so wonderful.
Or not so wonderful, but I think they're all doable. It's just, do we have enough bodies, and do we have enough interest, and do we have enough how do we take our eyes off what we think are our day-to-day priorities and try to derive new priorities, or to help those priorities move using the technologies?
Indeed, that is so true. And just to I guess close off this conversation, Jennifer, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to highlight any eminent milestones or activities. I guess we've talked about so much already, but just to focus us in on probably things that we probably should be aware of that is coming soon, that are eminent.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. I think we went through some of them already, and I don't actually have my fingertips on the milestones. But what I would like to reflect is that, having looked at the digital transformation opportunities and the recommendations made to the ministers in June, we already know that there are some critical things which will come out of agriculture, youth, transport, and education. For example, one of the things that I am excited about is that the agriculture sector at a regional level is looking at how it can improve farming for women using ICTs. And so that's something that I'm excited to work on with them, and hope that it will be a living milestone for the region. In the youth section, there are many things that we want to work on. I don't want to bear in on any now, because none come to mind actually, but obviously the youth are our now, and we need to be doing a lot of things with them, which moves the needle forward for them and for our country. So there are lots of milestones which have been identified, and we can have another discrete conversation around those milestones one morning, I hope. But I also mentioned so it's agriculture, youth, transport, and education, where I know we will be getting, I think, milestones that the region can rally around and can move us forward in a very cohesive manner in 2021. In the digital skills areas, as I mentioned, the task force is established by the mandate of COSAD. We hope that the first meeting will be at the end of February, and that task force is supposed to provide by September, October, a draft report which tells the region how to move forward, and will be using a lot of the regional entities such as CANTA and CXC to really advance the discussions and the plans for how we use digital skills and how we propagate them in what I would call a concerted, intelligent, strategic manner across the region to the publics that need them. Other milestones don't come to my mind immediately, but there are lots of other things which I hope I can engage you and entice you to have another conversation with me, perhaps in another month or so, March, the end of March.
Okay,
For
wonderful.
us to look at those milestones, because they will be fleshed out by then. We would have had a chance to look at the action plan coming out of these COVID-19 recommendations. And so I will have a lot more interesting information for you, a lot more finite information for you by that time.
Fantastic. And on that note, just thank you so much, Jennifer. I know how busy you are. The team at the CARICOM Secretariat is quite small, I know.
Remains two. We're
Yes.
hoping it will be three by the end of this year. But I thank you as well because this opportunity is. I'm never too busy to speak to anyone because it gives us the opportunity to share views, to hear what the other side of the public is thinking. And also, I think it gives our development partners, both regionally and internationally, an opportunity to hear some of the issues which are on the mind of the region and to engage us in that way. And I must thank you as well, because from the last podcast, last conversation we had together, many persons, probably about 40 or more persons, contacted me on various issues of the conversation. So thank you. And you are an unpaid part of the ICT for the team. And I thank you for that, Michelle, and look forward to our future conversations.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.